Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and with me this evening is a very, very special guest. I'm just incredibly excited to share him with you. Giorgio Navarini. If I Navarini, okay, good. I pronounced.
You got it.
All right. Has an amazing story to tell. He runs a chant organization. Is it a? I'll let you tell us about it in a minute.
Sure, yeah.
But he has an incredible background. He has an amazing ministry, and we're going to dive into that this evening. But before we get into that, we're going to go ahead and start with our prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, so Giorgio, which is the Italian for George,
Correct.
which happens to be my confirmation saint. So,
Great saint.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to a friend of mine just recently acquired a relic of St. George, and he said that he's going to send it to me for my birthday. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
That's a great present.
Yeah. It's incredible. Apparently St. George relics are pretty rare. So
I've never seen one in my life.
Me either.
Yeah, that's very rare.
Yeah. So you have, I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing right now, and then we'll go into your background. So tell us a little bit, who are you and what is the organization that you founded and what do you do?
Great, yeah. So I'm Giorgio Navarini, and I founded Floriani, which is a sacred music revitalization ensemble, and we started as a college group mainly 8 years ago. I was at Thomas Aquinas College in Southern California, and then during the start of the whole COVID thing, we basically we began as a 4-man ensemble, and we started working in Phoenix. That's where we were based out of. But we began traveling all over the United States, reintroducing churches and audiences to the wonders of Gregorian chant and the beauties of Catholic sacred music. So that's essentially what we do. Like a little quip that kind of gives people an idea is like we're the face of sacred. We want to be the face of sacred music, and we seem to be doing that really well. We had a pretty big main stage event this past summer at the Eucharistic Congress. So there was a big adoration session, 50,000 people. We were on the main stage in Lucas Oil Stadium, just performing a lot of the great chants of the church with some works of polyphony.
I have queued up actually a couple of your posts, Floriani Sacred Music, which is your YouTube channel. If we have 2.5 minutes, I'd like to play for everybody just this first one, the Salve Regina, which I think it's absolutely beautiful, and I think it'll be something that will help the audience to understand what it is that we're talking about, and then maybe you can talk about that particular rendition afterwards. So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and I will play this for the audience. Now, that is chant like the Western world is not used to hearing. This is something that you would hear, the intonations that you used are something that actually sounds an awful lot like what you would hear in the soundtrack to The Passion. But the the intonations are very Middle Eastern, I would say. They sound like they're from the I don't know, like the Jordan region. But the Western world, when we think of chant, it's, you know, the basic bars and the ups and downs as we intone the psalms or whatever it is. But these intonations are different. Could you explain to us the difference and why it is that this has such a different sound, and what that sound does, what it means? Just go into it.
Yeah, all great questions. So actually, the piece you're hearing is an original composition of mine, and
Really?
it's somewhat based on the solemn tone Salve Regina, which maybe a lot of you are familiar with. Um, but it's quite different. The modality, the mode that I'm using is fairly different than the chant modes. There's a lot of they sound like quarter tones. They're not actually quarter tones, but they are really quick half steps, trills, that kind of thing. Um, so I basically implemented just my love of the music of the East, namely Byzantine music,
Hmm.
music from the Syriac tradition, and fuse them together in this semi-Gregorian, semi-Syriac. I don't know. It's obviously in Latin, so um, and I think chants often can have the stereotype of being extremely pure and
Hmm.
just like nothing is done. There's no harmony. There's nothing like that. And really, the chant tradition is as unique as and as numerous as there are monasteries in Europe. And so you know every monastery had their own way of singing chants, and obviously they were
Right.
unified with the text. They were unified with somewhat the melodic structures, but overall, there's a certain flavor that every monastery, every place was adding into the great Catholic tradition.
You know, if I could think of an analogy, every monastery had its own wine. And
Yeah.
so its wine had a different flavor from all of the other monasteries. It's still wine, but the
Hmm.
difference in the flavor, the difference in the viscosity are the uniqueness of each monastery. And so when you're talking about the differences in the intonations in each monastery, I think what you're talking about is that wholesomeness that comes from the flavor of a monastery in the same way that you would have with a wine. I think that would be the best way that I can characterize it.
Yeah, and it's a perfectly the word diversity has sort of a bad connotation nowadays,
Mm,
but there is really in the Catholic Church is obviously a rich diversity in the rites, in the way the faith is expressed, and obviously all those should be expressed in a sacred way, especially with a holy text like this. But there is a legitimate diversity that happens with our Catholic faith, and maybe this is an example of that. I'm sure we've all heard different types of sacred music, whether it's in the Roman Rite or the Byzantine Rite. It's all very one of a kind.
so let's talk about the background here. How did you get to this point? Did you have a background in music and you wanted to start something and you've had this burning sensation since you were young, or is there some other path that that took you here?
Yeah, I I was fairly musical as a child. My parents got me involved in piano. I was probably 7 or 8, and really my love of sacred music. Um, my parents forced me into a choir that sang for the traditional mass, and I was about 14 at the time. And I was never really interested in the idea of choirs, but pretty much instantly when I joined this choir, I was very much struck by the music and very moved. And it's been that way since. So that was over half my life ago, so about 15 years ago.
Okay, so you had kind of a musical background to begin with. You were introduced to a love of chant when you were about 15 or so. Um, what about as you grew up and developed, and how how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah. So Thomas Aquinas College obviously had a pretty strong formation on my character, and it also helped me think about the different disciplines in the arts in a unified way. And so, typically in most education, you're not studying mathematics in conjunction with science and music and all the other arts. And so, getting that liberal arts education was really formative for me. But also just practicing and doing the music in the context of the liturgy is it's its own school, the school of experience. So I didn't actually go to a music school to learn all this. It came with time and practice and the experience.
Now, when you were at Thomas Aquinas, obviously it's a liberal arts college that doesn't have a major. I went to Christendom. My wife and I both went to
Nice.
Christendom,
Okay.
and her brother and actually she has two brothers and a sister that both went to TAC. So kind of the divergent path there. But we had a degree program, so you would focus on a particular element. So I have a political science and economics degree, as does my wife. But at TAC, you don't necessarily have a focus for your degree. It's just a liberal arts degree altogether. But what was your focus in college? I mean, were you focused primarily on philosophy, or were you theology, or what was your primary interest?
Yeah, so I think that theology is the queen of all the sciences,
Mm-hmm.
and so everything's directed towards theology. Now, at the same time, my thesis was on the nature of melody, so I had a very strong music focus, even throughout my 4 years, just being involved in music groups. But my final year was writing my thesis on the Gregorian melody. How do we define a melody? Like, what are its characteristics? So yeah, that was a really formative part of my the music part of me.
Are you familiar with Pius X's encyclical on sacred music?
Of course, yeah, we use that all the time.
Yeah, so he was trying to ensure the sanctity of sacred music, making sure that it remained with the mass as such. He was combating at the time this idea of operatic music, that people were trying to make the music a little bit more like the culture. Now, the culture of the early 1900s was a lot different than the culture today in terms of music. So if people had operatic music at mass right now, I think they would much prefer it to the guitars and the tambourines. However, as Pius X pointed out, it's not appropriate. So explain to us the appropriateness of music within the mass.
Yeah, so Pius X would say the Gregorian model it's the highest model for sacred music, and insofar as a musical composition is reaching towards that, only does it become more sacred. So obviously pop music does not even get into the realm of sacred. Right. It's so far removed from a chant. There's a meter to it, heavy beat, and chant is free rhythm. Chant has a lot more purity in the sound, and obviously no instrumentation. And so when it comes to what Pius X was dealing with, you're dealing with stuff that's sung in the context of an opera or a ballet, and it's being applied to the sacred liturgy. Now, so to the degree that you can get rid of some of the more, I don't know, not sacred elements, and place in like the Kyrie or the Gloria like Mozart did, there is some room for that music in the liturgy, but you really have to peel back all the operatic elements to get to that point.
So how do we differentiate between popular music, cultural music, operatic music, and sacred music? What is it about sacred music that makes it sacred?
Yeah, so I think there's two senses. One is the music itself is set apart, but a more objective sense is I think the music itself lifts the mind and soul to God just by the nature of the sound. And there's a movie out. It's called Interstellar.
Oh yeah, I remember that movie.
The soundtrack's by Hans Zimmer, and Hans Zimmer, he's a secular Jew, but the key instrument in the movie is actually an organ. And when he was asked, like, why did you input the organ into this cinematic, 2012 movie? He said the organ has a sense of the transcendence, and that the instrument itself could only bring about the grandeur of the universe, which is what the movie is about, just the mystery, the vastness, and the grandeur of the universe. And to be honest, I thought Hans Zimmer had a stronger defense of, the Catholic teaching on sacred music than almost all of our bishops in the United States. He's not even Catholic, but he's expressing this point, like there's an objective nature to the sound and how much it can lift us up to the transcendent.
That's interesting. So in discussing that kind of element of things, it raises the question of instrumentation. Obviously, certain percussive instruments were not, I wouldn't say condemned, but they were forbidden by Pius X. And they were things like, drums, the piano, other instruments that would be percussive in nature were forbidden. He did permit strings, not like guitars, but violins.
Right.
So a violin would be permitted, and he would permit certain brass instruments, but not woodwinds. So maybe do you know anything about the reasoning behind any of that?
Yeah, so I would imagine Pius X's reason is those instruments somehow they approach the human voice, which is the most sacred of instruments because it's God given. And so for one element of the human voice is that it has a sustained nature. You don't have that percussive, doesn't sound like a piano or guitar or like a drum. You're not hitting, an object to make the sound. It's a sustained sonation. And so those instruments that he's mentioning have an approach to the human voice that's much closer than any percussive instrument.
That's actually a very interesting explanation, because when we think about the sacred, we're talking about persons. Objects can be used for a sacred purpose, but they're not sacred in and of themselves. So when you have a sacred vessel, it's only sacred insofar as it is a vessel that's used for the person of Christ. Or if you have, like a tomb, okay, the tomb is sacred because it encases potentially a saint. So when we're talking about sacredness and sacred instruments and sacred objects, the closer to the person that you become, the more sacred it is. And anything, and I think what you're saying, and this actually, I'm thinking out loud here, but when we're talking about the percussive instruments, they're almost jarring, in the sense that they take you out of the sound of a human voice and they put you outside of that realm. So it seems to me that because the Mass is about the person of Christ, drawing the persons present in the Mass to him, then the sounds that are used for the Mass should also be as human as possible. So maybe that's the reasoning for sacred music.
And to build off that, you want the highest parts of a human person, namely the mind and the soul. Because if you start bringing emotions in, you can stray to the side of being overly sentimental, which I think is the problem United States music is in today. Oh, yeah. One person who I brought to the a New Rite liturgy, and they heard the music. Their first impression was like, it sounds a lot like a lullaby, something you would sing to a baby. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I never, and I think that observation is really reflective of the music. It's very sentimental. It's very much trying to feed the emotions rather than the intellect and the highest parts of the soul.
Right. So if music is there to draw us to the higher things, then it has to have kind of a higher nature. And the percussive instruments appeal to the lower nature. They appeal to the appetites that, so I think in terms of the higher things, the strings, where do you it's funny, I have like a synesthesia. I can feel the sounds of instruments. So it's when I hear a a string instrument like a violin or a viola, if I close my eyes, I hear it up here.
Hmm.
But if I'm hearing a guitar, I'm hearing it down here.
Oh, interesting.
So, I think that you can almost place a hierarchy of instruments in the body from
Hmm.
top to bottom and say, these are the ones that are the highest and these are the ones that are the lowest, the drums being the lowest.
Right.
Um, so when it comes to sacred music, if you have a sacred sound in an instrument, then obviously you have to have sacred intonations. So maybe you can get into the nature of that. Talk about the tones that are used and the the um, the various rhythms that are used in sacred music that are not the same that you would hear in popular music.
Right. So going back to chant has a free usually has a free rhythm to it. There are some different ways people will sing chant that isn't it's more metrical. That's
Mhm.
not very common, but
What do you mean by that?
yeah. So man, if I could just sing it, I'd probably make
Go ahead.
example, the Veni Sancte Spiritus for the Feast of Pentecost. Here's the metrical version. Veni Sancte Spiritus, Veni Popes, whatever the words are. And then if you did it in a a classical Gregorian rhythm, Veni Sancte Spiritus, et emite celidum. There's no really discernible like downbeat every
Huh.
part of the melody. Um, and so yeah, that's one thing about chant is you can't really fit it into the modern notation system very easily. You have to get rid of the bars. So any musicians who are out there listening, you have to get rid of your bar lines in between the measures because it just doesn't fit that system.
I've looked at a chant sheet. Now I can barely read music. I played the trumpet for 7 years and I can barely read music.
Right.
But I understand, quarterstaff, half note, full note. I know the triple notes and all the different notes. And
Mhm.
I can say, okay, this goes da 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 da, or
Exactly.
it goes da 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 da. I can figure that out because of the way the notes are written, but chant is written in these little blocks. And I looked at that and I went, what is this?
Right. Yeah, yeah. So you just meant some. I mean, you can recognize the meter of a piece, just from the da 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 da, whatever it is. Uh,
Mhm.
very hard to discern that in chant, and you really need
Right.
learned and experienced ear to feel it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So in a way, chant is more tradition than it is rote.
Yeah, that's true. Um,
Huh.
And the reason for that is, I mean, you don't have discernible, you don't have legible music manuscripts, before the turn of the first millennium. So around the year 1000, you start getting chant written in the way that we see it today. But before that, it was actually you'll have a sacred text, for example, the Alleluia or the Kyrie eleison, and there will be scribbles up and down those texts showing sort of the contour and the direction of the melody, but nothing pointing to the exact like here is the melody. You know what I'm saying?
So
Um,
so how does the sacred music affect the person in a way that the secular music would affect the person, the differences, and when you see kind of a more modern mass where they have the more modern music, do you think, and please explain how, if you think so, do you think that the use of music is informing their theological understanding of what's happening?
yes, absolutely. And that when I go to a liturgy and I see that the music is very either overly sentimental or it's very modern and just it doesn't fit the sacred liturgy, I'd say those people would have a very for 90% of cases would have a very poor understanding of what's happening at the liturgy. I would even say I would go insofar as to say it's dangerous for the faithful to hear that kind of music at a liturgy.
I agree. I agree. So the effect of the secular music on the individual makes them, well, first of all, I think it takes them out of the sacredness of the mass. Because as you pointed out earlier, it's more sing-songy and it appeals more to the emotions. But as you just said, it's out of place. Um,
And it desacralizes what is supposed to be sacred.
right.
And I think it more immediately does that than all the other parts of the liturgy. If the priest is wearing some ridiculous vestment, or you have 100 Eucharistic ministers up there, all terrible things. But the music directly speaks to the soul. And so if you have a very secular type of music that's going on, you're totally changing the disposition of the faithful, which I think it can corrupt the virtue of faith in whoever's attending. Not immediately, obviously. A lot of people are stronger than that, but eventually and throughout time, the virtue of faith will degrade with that experience of music.
So what's the difference between polyphony and chant?
Yeah, polyphony is where you have multiple melodies happening at the same time, and they're both independent from each other, but they fit together in a harmonic way. And polyphony would be a very hard thing to define other than the way I've said it, but it's something more you need to experience, whether you're by singing in a choir or just listening to it. And the effect of polyphony, it has basically a feel like there's multiple choirs going on, and but everything is adding together in this great harmony. So I think really the purpose of polyphony is to reflect the choirs of angels in heaven. Each of them have their different function, but they all interweave into this harmonious sequence.
That's interesting because as we were talking earlier about the different monasteries having their own flavor of a chant, if you were to take the flavors of different chants and look at them separately, you would say, okay, this is chant.
Mhm.
But if you look at them collectively, you could say, in a way, this is polyphony. These are the different ways in which the chants are intoned, and they're not disharmonious with each other. Maybe they are in an actual sequence, but in a more abstract way of looking at it, you could say that the different ways of approaching them coming together form those different choirs of angels, as you just said. So you have, in a human way, a representation of those choirs of angels, and then with polyphony, you're drawing things together to show that bigger picture, maybe.
That's a great way of explaining it. Yeah.
I'm just drawing from what you said. So.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of polyphony on your YouTube channel? I'll pull one up and play it for.
I don't think we polyphony is okay. So the one thing about polyphony, it's harder to integrate with equal voices, and so because we're a 4-man ensemble, we typically don't do a ton of works of polyphony. It's something more you get when you have different lines that are separated. So your soprano, alto, tenor, bass. It's more common in that, but we do not have a recording online, to my knowledge.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's all right. I was just looking for examples to show people. So polyphony, how long has polyphony been a part of sacred music as opposed to, say, chant? I mean, chant, I know, has been there from the very beginning. Our Lord chanted at the Last Supper. In fact, it's the only recorded time in all of Scripture where our Lord sang. So he intoned chants there at the Last Supper, which was a mass. But polyphony came in a little bit later. So tell us a little bit about the development of polyphony, along with how they retained chant as well.
Right. So I hypothesize that polyphony probably had its roots even in as far back as the Hebrew temple, because the choir of the Levitical priests, they had a very, very intense musical training, and I'm guessing polyphony just naturally developed with time. And but with the in current, in the first and second millennium, you probably you see it written down around the turn of the first millennium. Once chant is being written down, then you have different lines being added to the chants, and you see this in one example I'm thinking of is the Codex Calixtinus from Spain. You'll have singular chant melodies and then certain harmonic lines written in conjunction with those.
Awesome. Okay, so your hypothesis is actually that the polyphony existed right around the same time as the first generation of Christians, but that it became more prominent maybe around the year 1000.
I think it just became it started getting people started writing it down. When you're singing chant in a cathedral, one of the things you'll experience is the natural reverberations of the church, and you'll notice that certain notes harmonize with each other, and that immediate experience would likely lead musicians to start experimenting with harmonic tones and that kind of thing. And because in Jerusalem and in the Hebrew temple, everything was made of stone, very likely it was a very reverberant space, and so you're going to be hearing those harmonies across the temple. So I'm guessing it goes back as far as the ancient Jews.
I think that I think there's a direct correlation between the use of sacred music in terms of the chant and the polyphony and the architecture of a church. That as the architecture started to change over the 20th century, we also saw a change in the music. Now, there was obviously a revolution going on in the church at the same time that was kind of throwing a lot of things up in the air. But the reduction of the space in a church to almost be like a glorified meeting hall, as opposed to the high vaulted ceilings, the stone walls, the pillars, all of those architectural elements add to the acoustical elements of the space. And the use of acoustics for the use of sacred music, I think there's a harmony there that has to be maintained. And so when it comes to maintaining the faith, I think if we're going to see kind of a reversion back to true, authentic Catholic music in the Mass, we also have to go back to true, authentic Catholic architecture.
That's absolutely. There's nothing more jarring for a musician than to sing beautiful chant and polyphony in a tiny chapel that has 8-foot ceiling and just nothing inspiring around them. But you're absolutely right. The chant of the church. I mean, it just, if you had to make an architecture to it, architectify the chant or whatever, it would look like a Gothic cathedral. It would look like a Romanesque basilica. It's a very interesting thing. And actually, the late Professor Mart, who the professor of Stanford, he recently died, but he's a chant scholar, and he mentioned how some of the early works of polyphony that were written in the Notre Dame just reflected the architecture, and you can hear that in the sound of the music. And this is the music of Leonin and Perotin. It's really interesting that music, the architecture of a space is reflected in just the structure of the music.
That's fascinating. I know that there's a either a chapel or a cathedral in England where there are these really interesting geometric patterns that are carved out in stone, and they're on the wall in a sequence. And a scientist recently discovered that those geometric patterns were actually sound patterns. If you took a bunch of sand and you intoned a note, that those patterns, the sand would show those geometric patterns on whatever flat on a slate. Say you had sand on a slate and then you intoned the notes. the note produced a geometric pattern. Now, if you take those different notes or those patterns at the cathedral, it becomes a code for a series of notes.
Hmm.
So there's very definitely a correlation between architecture, the use of even the building materials. You know, if you're singing into a drywall, it's a lot different than singing into a stone.
Yeah. I recently had the experience of directing music at the Cologne Cathedral in Germany for the Sikh conference, the first Sikh International Conference, and it was an incredible experience just being in one of the most ancient monuments of Western civilization and just bringing sacred music to life. As a sacred musician, I don't get that experience very often in the United States. We typically
I'm
sing in
sure.
just the typical American, church space, and it's not very inspiring. But
Yeah.
um,
So when you've traveled all over, I've seen. Yeah, I mean, you were recently in Spain, I think. You also mentioned Byzantine music. So have you have you had an opportunity to chant in uh, I would say Roman architecture, old Roman architecture basilicas, and also Byzantine architecture basilicas? And have you noticed a difference?
I wish I could say. Actually, I went to the Hagia Sophia last year, but they didn't.
I was there last year also.
Really? Okay, yeah. I didn't get a chance to sing in it because it's not allowed. And also,
Oh,
they put carpet in it because it's now a mosque.
yeah.
Um, and anyhow, but I have had the chance to sing in the Vatican, all four major basilicas in Rome, and a lot
Wow.
of all the minor churches in Rome. Um, and I'm guessing that the art, because the architectures are so similar, I'm guessing the sound is also going to be really alike.
Okay. Okay. It was just a thought. Um, Now, I want to go back to your background and the start of what you're doing now, Floriani. We'll start with the name. Uh, how'd you come up with the name for this?
Great. Yeah, yeah. So it's not that long of a story, but my confirmation saint was Saint Florian. I chose him at the age of 15, and didn't have a really great reason for choosing him other than he was a patron saint of firefighters. I think I wanted to be a firefighter at the time. And fast forward to my year after Thomas Aquinas College, I was working at a summer camp in Northern California, and I went swimming in the Yuba River, and I got sucked into a whirlpool underneath the river, and
Oh,
I really should have died. There's a lot of deaths in that river from just accidents swimming, and as I got out of the water, I had this really strong impulse to thank my confirmation saint, Saint Florian,
hmm.
and I didn't know a bunch about him at the time, and then I began looking into his life, and I realized he's the patron saint of drowning victims,
No kidding.
and his martyrdom happened in a river in somewhere in Eastern Europe.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you definitely
Basically,
share a kinship.
yeah. So basically, when the group started at Thomas Aquinas College, I asked them, "Hey, what do you guys think of the name Floriani after Saint Florian?" And everyone's like, "Sounds like a great name." So we chose that, and then we kept it when the four man ensemble came into existence.
So Floriani, now you are an ensemble group, um, and you go around, you perform. But what else do you do?
Yeah, so we do trainings, workshops. We even have chant camps that we do. And this summer, we're going to actually have a few chant camps throughout the United States. So if you have a child between the age of 7 and 17, just stay tuned. You can go to our website and follow our newsletter, and you'll be updated on the chant camps we have. And then this summer, we're actually hosting. It's going to be our first sacred music immersion and a summer school course. It's called the Collegium. It'll be actually at my alma mater, so Thomas Aquinas College in Southern California. So this program is it's aimed at young musicians, people who are seeking to revitalize and bring back sacred music in at your local parish. So I think one big problem a lot of sacred musicians are experiencing is getting a program off the ground from like going from 0 to 15 miles an hour. So if you go to your local parish in the United States Midwest, it's going to be very hard to do that unless you just have the skills to do that. So this program we're hosting this summer will be offering that and giving people a really strong sacred music immersion and teaching them how to make that happen across the United States.
That's amazing. So for ages 7 to 17.
So that the chant camp age 7 to 17, and then for the collegium, it's any age. But we mainly want to focus on graduate and post grad. But if there's other music directors in the United States who are interested in attending, like please apply.
So where is this going to be?
That's going to be at Thomas Aquinas College.
Oh, in California.
Mm.
Okay. And I've got the website up here on the website, so you guys can definitely go there and check it out, floriani.org. So you teach chant and you help people, you introduce people to it. What kind of a response have you gotten, and how long ago did you start doing this in terms of helping to train people and do these camps?
Yeah, so I've actually been doing it for a good part of my life, probably since I was 15, 16. Immediately after getting involved in sacred music, I just started replicating it and getting others involved. It's been quite a while for me. And then for the other gentlemen, I'd say it's been a little bit off and on for their time.
And what kind of a response are you getting from the general populace? How popular are your trainings and your camps and whatnot?
So I wish they were more popular. I think our performances are a lot more popular. But we're seeing a really strong sacred music revival in the United States and even across the world. People want the great tradition of our forefathers, and it's a big wave that's rising. So, have you actually helped music directors transform their parishes So my work alone, I've helped transform about 3 or 4 parishes.
3 or 4.
So one, for example, is St. Anne's in Phoenix. That's where actually we had our base and getting started. They provide a lot of funding for us, and so we began a pretty much their first sacred music program. We helped bring in chant and sacred polyphony and establish a children's choir, all these kinds of things.
So have you, are you a donation-driven organization? Are you a 501c3 or are you for profit? How does your organization stay funded?
So we're just a 501c3 nonprofit, and we get funded by whoever wants to see the revival of sacred music in the U.S. So if that's you, great. Give us a call, or you can find us on our website for that.
So we do have on the Lepanto Institute website, we look at charities and we help people to see which ones are safe and which ones are not safe. We'll definitely be adding Floriani to our safe list. Awesome. I think it's pretty clear that we're talking to somebody who's not an enemy of the church.
That's a great resource. Maybe I need to get on that.
Yeah, well, you're about to be on that. So
I need to find the charities just to
Yes. So what we do. Obviously, our audience knows what we do, but I'll tell you, we have a charity reports list. We do these deep dive investigations into organizations that are of a charitable nature, and we help people to understand which ones are safe or not safe based on a set of criteria. Are they promoting abortion, contraception, homosexuality, Marxism, heresy, that kind of thing? And we had so many that were negative. We started looking for ones that were positive, ones that were going to help build up Christendom. And organizations such as yours and various of the religious orders that we've looked into, we put on our safe list because people want to. Catholics are generous by nature, and American Catholics are generous by abundance. So when you put the two together, Catholic Americans really want to help people in the best way possible. So when we put your name and your organization on our list, hopefully this will be a good way for people to start seeing your organization and knowing, here's a group that I can really get into. So hopefully we'll get some visibility for you that way.
Well, great. Yeah, yeah. I mean, just be clear, about 100% of your donation goes straight to the revival of sacred music. So just to be clear.
Yeah, well, that's
We don't send anything, to strange, organizations overseas or anything like that.
right, right. You're not re-granting anything, so that's a plus, and you're not helping illegals come across the border.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So, no, that's wonderful. And once again, so you've got Floriani, the website here. How can people follow you? Do you have a newsletter? How
yeah.
can
So they
people follow your work and stay in touch?
Yeah, sure. They can register for our newsletter on our website. If folks are using Instagram, I know it's not the best social media, but it's actually a great way we get our content out there. So we produce a lot of sacred music videos and chants, and we post them on Instagram. We also our YouTube. If you want to subscribe to our YouTube list, we post a lot of our videos there.
So I'm going to put your Instagram up on the screen too. So people, those of you who use Instagram, I know I'm supposed to and I don't, but
We don't have
those
a
of you,
TikTok, so it's our one.
right, right. Well, that's a plus. That's a plus. So you've got your Instagram, Florian Sacred Music. Let's see. I do want to close the show this evening with your Anima Christi because I thought it was absolutely beautiful. So I'll close with that. But is there anything else, any other message that you'd like to convey to our listeners before we close for the evening?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a big one of our biggest releases recently was our Chants of Deliverance album, which is it's a compilation of chants that exorcists have found to be particularly effective in the rite
No
of
kidding.
exorcism. So that's called Chants of Deliverance, and we consulted with a few exorcists on getting the best and most effective chants for spiritual warfare. So, for example, one of the chants on the album is the Dies Irae, which one of the exorcist who I'm friends with, he said, this chant drives the demons insane. I was like, okay.
Just by playing it on the computer or off your phone,
Apparently,
or
so he plays it during the actual ritual of exorcism. So it's on a speaker, but that replicated sound, it's a holy sound, and just demons can't stand it.
that's interesting. That's it. So that's actually a very interesting point. One of my priest friends, Father Terrence Gordon, God rest his soul, he told me once that if your kids are kind of agitated and they're having a hard time and they're restless and whatnot, put on chant. So
Yeah.
when we're driving in the car, every once in a while the kids will get restless, and especially the younger ones, they start to cry and whatnot. So we'll put on Gregorian chant. Boom, they quiet right up.
We have a
Sometimes they
lot
go
of
right to sleep.
yeah, we have a lot of reports like that. Calming children down, putting them to sleep. Just bringing in an aura of peace into the home.
I have she's 5 years old now, a daughter 5 years old. But when she was about 2 or 3, and we'd go to put her down to bed for the night, she just would not go to sleep. So I started putting on Gregorian chant, and I'd put it on, and she'd go to sleep. It got to the point where she was like, "I don't want to listen to that. I'll go to sleep." Because she knows.
Okay, nice. That's good.
Yeah. So very, very cool.
So yeah, Chants of Deliverance is big. We also have a Gregorian Chant Academy, which is an online program for anyone who wants to learn and really do a big deep dive into chant. And so that's also on our website. We have 2 entrance doors throughout the year where people can join. I think that we have another one coming up in February. So you could just join our list for that if that interests you. Yeah, I think that's about it.
That's fantastic. This is great. My mother's a musician, and we've been going to a traditional Latin mass parish for, since I was 14. But and then at Christendom College, we had a beautiful polyphony choir that I think they actually put out a couple of professional CDs. But I've grown to really love the traditional music And I really appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the fact that you are trying to bring back the sacredness and the tradition of the music in the mass and in the church. And it's such important work, and I'm glad that you're out there doing it.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it.
You bet. We'll close with our prayer here, but before I want you to stick around. I'm going to play the Anima Christi, and then we'll close with that. So why don't we close with our prayer now, and then I'll put on the Anima Christi. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory,
pray for us.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Let me put this on for everybody, and you can take a look at this as we go. Here we are. Good night, everybody. We'll see you all next week.